Thank you for inviting me to be part of the significant workshop. In the short time I have to spend with you, I will cover only a few key points from New Zealand's experience that seem to me might be relevant for Australia. The presentation focuses on law reform. The first key point that I wanted to make was that having a dedicated politician to lead the legislative process was critical in New Zealand. Our law changed in 2007, so 15 years ago now, feels like history. The law change might not have taken place as soon as it did if the Green Party MP, Sue Bradford, had not had her private member's bill drawn from a ballot. It proceeded through the parliamentary process with 3 readings and some very acrimonious debate, and was finally passed with the support of the majority of all MPs across all parties. I acknowledge Sue's tenacity and integrity. She did not give in to calls, which came several times, to water down her bill so that it specified how children could be hit lightly or safely. A second key point was that the leadership of the Children's Commissioners was important. Dr. Sir Ian Hassel was the first Commissioner for Children, and in 1992 he created a media furore when he came out and said that he supported repeal of Section 59. All the commissioners up to the time the law changed were supportive. A special thanks is due to Dr. Dame Cindy Kiro, who was Commissioner for Children in the years immediately before law change. She and her staff did a great deal to influence opinion in various settings. Now, I want to focus on some of the major challenges we faced. I think they'll be faced in Australia, and I'm sure they were faced in lots of other places too. Our cause was not a popular one. In fact, anything but popular. Physical punishment of children was a long-held tradition, still believed by many to be beneficial. Many people resent being told what to do and were angry about intrusion into family life and what they saw as parental rights. Parents were anxious about the implied criticism of their parenting, and there were fears about the risk of prosecution for parents who only tapped their children. The next challenge was that politicians were very wary. Politicians depend on public popularity for votes. Even those who agreed with us privately were not willing to be public about it. And the next challenge was that media were very unhelpful, especially in the early days. Briefly, the media thrived on controversy and divisiveness. Perhaps the most unhelpful thing they did in New Zealand was to frame our movement as the anti-smacking campaign, advocates as anti-smackers, and later the bill as the anti-smacking bill. Thus, they trivialised the issue and made advocates seem unreasonable. So you in Australia might like to think about an appropriate name for your campaign that puts a positive frame around it and get it taken up earlier by the media. Over time, things changed a lot as excellent opinion pieces and editorials began appearing, and we learned how we might get good press. I'm not a media user or a follower. However, I have grave anxieties about how easy misinformation is spread these days. That wasn't such a problem for us, but I think it'll make it harder. The fourth challenge was dire warnings. Those opposed and public in their opposition to law change spread fear and misinformation. For example, children who are not physically punished will become out of control and even criminals. Parents would be prosecuted in great numbers. Courts would be overrun. Some Indigenous leaders feared that Maori would be disproportionately prosecuted. For the record, youth crime has decreased in recent years. There has been no evidence that courts are overrun with trivial complaints. Nor has there been any claim that Maori are disproportionately prosecuted, although in general they are. And an important provision was written into the new law, which actually helped with the issue of prosecution. For some time, New Zealand police had been given discretion in law, allowing them not to proceed with cases that would come before them if the offence involved was considered to be so inconsequential that it was not in the public interest to proceed with the prosecution. This provision was written into the final law, just to remind people, because it already was law. We know from monitoring the implementation of the new law, which took place a few years later, that in fact, the police used this discretion wisely. A fifth challenge was the active opposition to law change that came from some Christian groups. This was by far the most organized, persistent, and public opposition that we had to face, both before and unfortunately after the law changed. These groups and individuals were very vocal and adept at getting media time. They lobbied politicians, ran giant advertisements in papers, and funded their own research. They appeared well-funded. They undermined international research and brought in so-called experts from other countries to speak in New Zealand against law change. During our campaign, on the positive side, we were able to build relationships with mainstream church ministers who helped a great deal by writing excellent articles and spoke out on a modern Christian view of children. I will now move on to a few factors that contributed to change. It was important to have an organisation willing to lead and do the work, at least at the beginning. And that organisation was EPOC, which we started in 1997. Much of our work focused on building support. We never had paid staff. We did this all in our own time, and we only secured small amount of funding. But on engaging support, what I want to say was that although we did this painstakingly by meeting with and writing to individuals and organisations and inviting them to join a network of supporters of repeal of the existing law, we were successful. Supporters agreed to be publicly named as being in support of repeal. We produced newsletters, spoke at conferences, made relationships, and in time, our support grew so that by the time that the law changed, there was a very visible and credible list of supporters. Included such agencies as family support agencies, child advocates such as UNICEF and Save the Children, some academics and professional groups. And this let us move on to the next phase, in a sense, which I call collaboration. Some of the large organisations throughout New Zealand helped by donating staff time so that the very large volume of work by that stage was shared. And we worked together on the development of information, media work, public speaking, and lobbying politicians. This sharing was quite a relief at that point. Just a word on working with Maori and Pacific people. Although I acknowledge we could have done a lot more in that area, we were able to identify small numbers of organisations and individuals, and over time, some leaders emerged who influenced others. Pacific people are very involved in their churches, and churches were influential. Some religious leaders spoke up. By the time the repeal of Section 59 became before Parliament, the Maori Party had 4 members in Parliament. All 4 publicly supported repeal. Additionally, a positive factor, I think, in this area was that in May 2004, the government organised a parent education program called SKIP, Strategies with Kids Information for Parents. This was funded, this project funded local organisations in local communities to deliver community development programs aimed on about positive parenting. It did not mention law reform, which was still rather too sensitive, but I do think the work that it did with local Maori and Pacific communities was very helpful. And finally, a word about political lobbying. We couldn't get away from it. There was only one way to influence politicians. and that was to meet with them pretty regularly. We were fairly discouraged right at the beginning. I don't think they even replied to our correspondence. But eventually, with perseverance, many politicians began to quite quietly agree with us. And it was an essential element of our work. So when the opportunity came along, led by a politician from a minor party, the others followed in behind. I hope that this presentation has been helpful. It only brushes the surface of what was a long and multifaceted effort involving a lot of people. I hope you're going to achieve your goal a lot faster. Best wishes for your work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beth. You've got so many really key lessons for us here, and I thank you so much for that presentation, which we can follow up with having a read. Maria's put that into chat. I think, I mean, your points about so interesting that you'll have politicians having private support but not wanting to go public with this. And, you know, we're already aware how much we need to have some political leaders to champion this in bills in our states, territories. So I think that really gives us good information. And your issues also about media too, I think are really, really challenging. And we're going to have to think about that and be well prepared to go into this. Can I just invite any questions from the floor? Anyone have any specific things you'd like to ask Beth? At this point, we've got a couple of minutes. It's wonderful. You've also put this down in a book, which I think you've made publicly available. I think that's very useful as well.
The book can be downloaded from the Save Children New Zealand website. Yes, yeah. Still available in PDF.
That's great. Thanks, Beth. And I guess that also kind of highlights too that we need an organisation who will champion this. And that's also, you know, was one of the things that you had in New Zealand.
It doesn't happen without somebody doing the work.
That's right. And, you know, I take your point, there's a lot of work in this that's unpaid to make these sorts of changes. But yeah, thank you very much.